everyone. This is Pam Green. I'm back again with another live presentation, and I'm really excited to have with me today Mr. Miguel McInnes, who is the CEO of an ambulatory care facility in the District of Columbia. So welcome, Miguel.
Pam, pleasure. I'm glad to join you. I've heard so much about your channel, so I'm interested and glad to be a part of this conversation today.
Well, I know how busy you are, especially healthcare in the district, and I think it's important that people get to meet leaders like yourself. This is not staged. This isn't pre-rehearsed. This is really leadership in the moment, and specifically leadership with regards to our ability to remain relevant in the crises that we face, and we face a number of those. But before we jump into that, I really have to tell people about who you are, because I think that's so incredibly important. So I have a little bio that I'm going to read, and then I'm going to ad lib a little bit.
Don't embarrass me now.
Look, you know what? Dress you up a little bit. So people need to know that you are a nationally recognized healthcare leader with over 25 years of healthcare and management consulting experience. That your professional experience has been focused on performance improvement and driving revenue through business process improvement, technology, and business strategy development. We know that you have a reputation as an innovator and a change agent. And in 2005, the National Association of Community Health Centers awarded you with the Norton Wilson Regional Leadership Award for your leadership of the ambulatory care network of clinics in the Mid-Atlantic region. We know that you are also published extensively in journals, blogs, and popular magazines such as Forbes. And what he didn't give me that I need to add in is that he is a graduate of Yale, MIT, and Harvard University. And what we jokingly we talk about him behind his back, so you know these things, is that if you're going to have a conversation with Mr. McInnes, you need to carry a pen, a paper, and a dictionary, probably a thesaurus too, because you're going to learn something new. So, and here's what we do. You'll say something, and you say, you know what I mean? You understand? We're like, yeah, gotcha. Yeah. And everybody's like, did you get that note? Okay, text me that note so I can look up that word too. So our brains are giant now because of you. And I'm so grateful that you were able to take a little bit of time out your day to speak to myself as well as to the audience. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So I'm going to jump right in, because being in healthcare, being in the middle of a crisis, being a person of color, specifically an African-American male in the District of Columbia, and having your rich wealth of experience, we need to talk about change, and we need to talk about the ability to be flexible and adaptable, or else, and really in your words, which I thought was just so timely, the importance of being relevant. So talk to me about why this is so important for right now.
When you start to, in preparing for this conversation today, I was looking at a meme and it said, change is inevitable, but growth is optional.
Yes.
And what I've realized over the course of my career is that change is going to happen. Yeah. How we react to change will sort of tell the story of who we are.
Yep.
And how our organization will either survive or thrive. And I think the challenge that we have as leaders is remembering that we have to look beyond the immediate to the long term. And remembering at the end of the day that our ability to adapt to change is really what is key in terms of our success as executives.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that we're seeing now, particularly as a result of this COVID crisis within our sector, being healthcare, has been those organizations that may not necessarily have thought of telehealth as a core portion of their business had to quickly come up to speed. Because if you didn't, you'd be out of business.
Right.
And so, what you quickly realize, and that actually happened with us, while telehealth represented a portion of a segment within our business line item, it has grown to represent now roughly about 30% of our business.
Yeah.
And we anticipate that will continue post this crisis. Because what has happened is our consumers have new expectations.
Yes.
They're looking for they've always wanted convenience,
Yeah.
but now many people are just a little nervous about coming back.
Yeah.
And so they're like, "Can I see you online? And if not, do I really have to come in? And how long will it take? And what specifically are we going to talk about?" And so being able to have a plan in place to be able to respond to those questions and be able to meet the new consumer need is so important, because that's the difference between you being able to service that patient or your competitor.
Yes.
And I want them all to come to Metro Health.
Well, and what's really interesting, because so you've got people on the front lines, really, right? And then you've got you have a lot of I wouldn't say at risk, high risk clients that you're serving in the community as well, and you are serving the community. So you got all of these different fights on the front, and you got to stay competitive within this space. So being adaptable and flexible is incredibly important. I'm curious what you have found is the biggest challenge for you that you've been having to work through and overcome.
I think the biggest challenge is redefining or readjusting, actually, to consumer expectations around how they will access care.
Yeah.
Prior to COVID, um, like I said, easily 70-80% of our business was tied to patients coming into the office, being seen, and then going home.
Yeah, there were no other options. You just went in the office. That was it. Now they got options.
Exactly. And see, what's happening is they have options, and not only do they have options, but what they're looking for is, how are you going to manage and maximize our interaction together?
Yeah.
And so, because they're managing multiple issues. And so what they're looking for is not only flexibility, but relevance. Because here's the other thing that we're also seeing, because of not only the stress and anxiety of having to be cooped up as a result of this COVID crisis, and then you add on top of that some of the social justice protests that are happening, and people are feeling very engaged in regards to the events of the day.
Yeah.
We're finding that people are asking, "Look, do you also offer behavioral health services?"
Wow.
And we do.
Wow.
And so that's a segment of our business that has gone through the roof.
Wow.
Because what's happening is they need to be seen for their traditional medical issues, but they're also realizing that anxiety and depression is also a big issue. So your ability to offer services that complement is definitely something that we have. We offer at Metro Health, but the challenge has been being able to make sure that we're offering that in a way that's relevant to the patients that we see. Because the other issue that we're finding is that not all mobile devices are equal.
That's right.
And so we've actually had to be able to offer our telehealth services on multiple platforms that will accommodate those phones that are not necessarily as up to date.
Yep.
As some of the others, and so making it a lot easier for our patients to connect with our providers. I think
When you go ahead.
I think the other thing I also want to mention as well is what this crisis has taught us has been being adaptable and flexible as it relates to our employees.
Yeah.
Because here's the other thing, we actually had to move our operations virtually.
Wow.
So we had to basically be able to have the tools in place to manage employee productivity, as well as employee engagement. Because part of the first 4 weeks, we were gangbusters,
killing it.
killing it. And what we realized now that we're several weeks in is that being cooped up at home or within the spaces that they're located in, it's stressful.
Challenging.
And it's challenging.
Yeah.
And so being able to support our employees in offering services like EAP to help them navigate their own challenges. It's hard as a healthcare provider. You're constantly giving. That's what you do.
Yeah.
And sometimes being able to have someone to give to you is just as important. So adaptability has been something that we've definitely had to not only practice for our patients, but also for our team as well.
Yeah. So I know that you all were, I mean, they're just, what you were just saying is just so rich with information. And I'm sure people will be, are typing their questions in and their thoughts in, and we'll respond to those. I'm curious, I'm curious, like, is there an age difference in the demand from an employee perspective and a client perspective in what they're looking for? So you and I had talked offline about how when my doctor's office called and said, "Hey, we're going to set up this televisit for you," and I'm like, "Well, what am I getting that you're not touching me? So is the price going down? Is what's going to be different?" And well, just tell me when y'all back in the office, because this is not working for me, right? So for me, I'm like, this is not working. But what I hear you saying is people have been able to quickly adjust and to adapt in this new environment.
Yeah, what has happened has been we have found that prior to COVID, a lot of our telehealth services were primarily utilized by our younger patients, the 20-somethings, 20 and 30-somethings.
Yeah.
They want to come in, they're primarily coming in for a physical or medication management. And so therefore we can do it on the phone. And so they are, everything for them revolves around their mobile device. Our much older patients, however, while some of them are tech savvy, the challenge has been they like that face-to-face.
Yeah.
They're like yourself. I want to talk to somebody because you know what? The screen is a little intimidating. Yeah. And I may want to, I want to see your reaction in terms of, how best for me to manage my own health and what do we need to do. And so what has happened with this process has been getting everyone to sort of, we've had to reset the expectations because there's certain things that realistically you need to come in for.
Yes.
And so we're now having to reset our patients' expectations as to, yes, for initial, medication management issues or follow-ups, this is great.
Yeah.
But if it's something that visually requires us to take a look and we need to engage with you, especially if you're a new patient where we've never seen you before, you need to come in. And so what we see post this crisis is resetting the expectations.
Yeah.
Because what's happening is there's going to have to be flexibility on the part of our consumers. Because we don't want to oversell people as we're going to be all things to all people. We need to be, we need to define what we can do well.
Yeah.
So that we are targeting the right patient for our practice.
Yeah. I'm wondering, let me ask you this question, and this may be unfair to put you on the spot like this, but so what just popped in my mind was this concept of concierge physicians and medical care. Whereas I can, as a medical provider, almost, it seems, push the easy button and have a televisit. And then for those who really want that in-person care, tap me on the knee and see if I have good reflexes, go and all that stuff, who really want that personal touch. I used to imagine that was going to be physicians going to the home, and that was going to be sold at a premium. And we know that does exist. However,
Sure.
I'm wondering if now that in-person visit is going to be be provided at a premium, and where does that leave those who are disenfranchised, or those who sit at a disadvantage? Is the healthcare honestly the same? What do you think? What are your
Well,
thoughts?
here's the thing. I think what we will see going forward, particularly for our more vulnerable members of society and our more vulnerable patients, um, the access to care is going to be key.
Yeah,
They're going to be the ones that, because they have multiple chronic conditions, these are not things you can treat on via telehealth.
right.
Um, I think once they've come in and we've been able to stabilize them, we can use telehealth to be able to support them in terms of managing their health. And actually, we're doing that with a number of our patients,
Yeah.
particularly our diabetics. We're able to do that in terms of they'll do their self tests. We can then pull their information through a portal, web portal, and then if there are issues where there's readings that are out of alignment, we
Mm-hmm.
can then follow up. So there will be a place for maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a place for engagement for those patients that are fairly healthy and really looking for your annual checkup.
Yeah.
Telehealth will work well for those patients. They'll still need to come in, you
Periodically
know,
to have that
probably
physical.
instead of 3 times a year, maybe once a year,
Yeah.
just to get a physical. Because I mean, with a physical, you can't really do that online.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, there have been times when I've needed a refill on my medication, and the doctor says, you need to come in. And I'm like, what? Just call the doctor. Y'all know, ask me some questions. Do I physically
Right,
have to take off work to come and see you so you can refill a prescription? So I
right.
actually think it could work to our advantage, and people could get better health care because
Yep.
you're relying more on knowing I can just call my doctor, have an appointment, do it on my lunch break, and not ever have to really leave the office and take time off of that. So it really could actually work to the advantage of those who might think that we're now creating a greater divide between the haves and the have-nots.
Here's the thing. One of the things that we are working on and toying with is really moving from being sort of that, taking it from a sort of didactic approach, but more
Yeah.
to more of a coaching approach,
Yeah.
where, normally the way healthcare used to be provided, you go see a doctor, he tells you what to do, and there's very little input you have.
Right.
That has changed, especially this generation here.
Oh boy.
They ask a lot of questions. Google is their best friend. And so a lot of them would have thought that they went to medical school. So
Yeah.
they're going to challenge you, which is maybe something that maybe my generation wouldn't necessarily have done.
Right.
And so what we're realizing is sort of translating that relationship to more of a coach.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what's going to be support. That will support the telehealth platform.
Mm-hmm.
Because for a coach, just like you do business coaching. We're going to get on the phone. You'll be able to access your medical records, and we're going to talk through what's your plan of action for the next 60 days or 90 days.
Yes.
And that's really where I see telehealth regardless of the patient type,
Mm-hmm.
is going to be helpful. Because part of the thing, as long as they have access to mobile equipment, and then
Mm-hmm.
what we're working on right now is creating drop-in centers.
Yeah.
So even if you don't have the mobile technology, you can drop into one of our centers, talk with one of our providers, and you still have that direct visit if you
Right.
didn't want to do a face-to-face visit.
Gotcha.
But what we want to be able to do is to be able to really support our patients in achieving the best health for them.
Yes.
And I think telehealth is going to play a key role in making that happen. And that's really something I think in healthcare, we really this process and this crisis really brought to the limelight.
Yeah.
Telehealth, we've been talking about telehealth for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's been something that, everyone's saying, yeah, it's great. We're gonna be able to be like the Jetsons.
Yeah,
You
right.
know, something will come up like Dick Tracy on your phone
Right.
and a hologram, and we'll talk to your doctor and he'll give you everything.
Yeah.
That didn't.
Nope.
But what has happened though is it is providing the level of accessibility that wasn't there before.
Right.
And that's really the thing that we are really excited about. And that's where I think when you start to talk about change and and being adaptable to that,
Mm-hmm.
those organizations, whether in healthcare or not,
Mm-hmm.
your ability to adapt to change is so key.
Yep.
And that actually is important, especially as you start to look at not only your business strategy,
Right.
not only your employees, but also looking at even from your HR perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the big thing. You know, one of the things we've always used to hire people on is based on expertise.
Yeah.
And you have this talent, and so therefore we're gonna hire you for that talent. But if you have that talent, but you're inflexible, how useful are you to the organization?
That's right. And we have a lot of people who right now are sitting in organizations and their world has just been shaken, turned upside down.
Exactly. Exactly.
They had to go overnight from I don't believe in remote workforce to
Exactly.
especially for my receptionists and for certain people we need to see to everybody going to work from home and
Exactly.
we're gonna enjoy this, right? And not so much. So those people are not okay. But there was
Right.
something that you had said early on when we were talking about organizations risk losing market share and
Mhm.
specifically becoming irrelevant. And that's not just for the healthcare industry, it's for all industries and all business
Right.
types. Talk to that a little bit.
Well, you know what? I think what happens, I'm a strong believer that irrelevancy will become the new cuss word for 21st century.
You said what? Right.
You say I'm irrelevant
Right.
because what technology has done, it has sped up
Yeah.
the evolutionary process of business.
Yep.
And so what it causes is that organizations have to be proactive and anticipatory
Mm-hmm.
of what their consumer needs are, and now have to start thinking about that as it relates to their employees' needs.
Yes.
Because here's the thing, when you start to think about the fact that right now, the point that you just made, everyone's now working remotely.
Mm-hmm.
We now have to deal with not only being able to ensure that we're producing the same product at the same level of quality, but also at the same time making sure everyone has complete information
Yes.
for the development and delivery of that final deliverable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's not an easy thing to do.
Right.
Because remember, when we're in the office, hey, John, I didn't necessarily, from our last meeting, there was something, you mentioned something, and it's a quick conversation. Now we're having to rely on email, Microsoft Teams, all of these other platforms to try to make sure people are communicating. And sometimes people get overwhelmed.
They do. I mean, I know that just when I get emails, and I hate Microsoft Outlook, by the way, for it just truncates everything and
Yes.
new stuff comes in. It's part of that same message from 20 weeks ago. And
Right.
but anyway, we're all having to stay on top of
Mhm.
technology, and
Yep.
people who are just struggling to read email are going to get left completely behind because they can't even master that.
Exactly. But here's the other thing too. I think what is happening is that um, how you reorganize teams
Yeah.
is important.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we've had to do is really look at what are some of the natural um, groups that coalesce,
Mm-hmm.
and how those groups that how they naturally coalesce, how that will impact our information flow,
Mm-hmm.
our patient throughput, but also more importantly, our ability to make sure everyone is informed.
Yeah.
And so what we've realized is that through those natural ecosystems, we have to make sure that they're not isolated, but they overlap and
Yeah.
create concentric circles so that they all touch.
Yes.
And so what we found has been really making sure, not only using platforms like email, chats, and those type of things, but also just pulling people out and having what we call town halls.
Yeah.
Here's what we're talking about today. Because one of the things that I've come to realize as well, as you're looking at dealing with the change in environment that we're all going through, is that because people now are so used to working, before they were used to working in a set space, they would have a set routine and they would see set people.
Yeah.
When you take them out of that environment and put them into an isolated environment, some people thrive and
Yes.
some people actually shrivel.
That's right.
And so, what we realize is that creating an opportunity for people to connect and
Mm-hmm.
engage and giving space to just breathe,
Mm-hmm.
collectively breathe, and just collectively talk and connect is so important, which is something that, a lot of times as a senior leader, I never really put a whole lot of credence in until recently.
Right.
Because the reality is that if you're not, if you don't feel I'm connecting with you,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be productive.
No. No. No, not at all. Wait a minute, I'm taking a note because again, like I told y'all, he says stuff and then your brain goes, it explodes all over the place. So keep talking. I'm taking a note. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so so I think at the end of the day, that component of making sure that you're taking into consideration the um, the human element is so important, and I think because that's part of how I believe business will need to change and adapt um, post this crisis, because what not only will employees now have an expectation that remote work is something that they will want to do, because we've seen, what is it, Facebook,
Yeah.
Google is saying that, Facebook I think is saying that they may have their employees work remotely going forward.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that that's now an expectation. And now, how do you then therefore guarantee the ability to produce the same quality product that you used to do um, apart now, when you used to do it together? And I
Yes.
think that's where it's going to be important for organizations to really look at how they adapt to this new normal going forward. And I think what's important is looking at that adaptation not only from a process perspective,
Mm-hmm.
but also from an HR perspective.
Yes.
Because to me, going forward, what I'm going to be looking for are people who are not only emotionally intelligent, but are adaptable,
Yes.
that are self-motivated, that are um, that are positioned to move forward in any kind of environment. Because before we used to assume everyone's going to be in the office. I can figure out if I have a problem or an issue, I can go talk to you.
Yeah.
But now that's not always going to be the case.
No. So that means that leaders, I mean, I really like what you were saying in terms of this concentric circle and how important it is for leaders really to be intentional
Yep.
and staff, right? So
Mhm.
leaders and staff, leaders have to be intentional in how we think about building the team and engaging the
Exactly.
team and rehiring and retaining employees. And then employees have to be intentional and really thoughtful in building their brands and understanding what's going to work for them and what's not going to work for them. And it's going to give new meaning to really to teamwork and to engagement
Exactly.
and
And
how we do the work is changing.
exactly, because here's the other thing too. Just like employees will have new expectations of their employers,
Yeah.
their employers are now going to have new expectations of their employees over beyond just regular productivity.
Yes. Yes.
Because part of the conversation now has to be, when we're interviewing you, how are you in terms of working remotely?
Mm-hmm.
Are there things that would impede your ability to be productive?
Mm-hmm.
All right, because you got to look at the environment that people are working in.
Oh, yeah.
And so these are now new questions that we're going to need to start asking because that's going to influence our hiring decisions.
Yes. And that whole move or movement, really, I would say over the last 20 years that started, with teaching children in elementary school, grade school, and, how to work in teams and all of that
Right.
stuff. Now, because, we're not used to, that's just the Asian approach to building teams. We're not going to need that. And now look at us. We're now having to rely heavily on how do we work together remotely. So we're going to have to teach people how to do that. We're going to have to provide resources to not only ensure that they have the skill set to do the work, but that they can work with other people. And the other thing that you brought out too was in terms of benefits, ensuring that I know that you all went through an intensive look at employee assistance programs. And how different the programs were. And the one that stood out was the one that had the behavioral health component, not just you get 3 sessions for 30 minutes with somebody who may or may not be licensed. I mean, the one that you all went with, they were deep into behavioral and emotional health. I mean, they have some licensed psychiatrists on staff 24 hours to help. That's a shift. And so people are going to have to, organizations are going to have to take a step back and look at, do I really have the right benefits, the right resources, the right training and development support, the right leaders to lead in this new era that we're going into?
The one thing that we haven't talked about
is
the change that we will need to implement among middle managers.
Okay.
We've you hit on the head the point earlier. We taught managers to manage in teams that they can physically see.
Yeah.
All right. Or they can get access to quickly, meaning I can go to your office or what have you. Or if you worked at another site, there will be opportunities for us to connect and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we're moving towards remote spaces, we're now really going to have middle managers that really know how to lead through empathy and lead through motivation.
Yes. Yes.
Because part of the thing, one of the things I've found with with managers has been, a lot of times they try to lead through example, which you should, but also sometimes this generation of young people I've found, they want to have meaning to what they're doing. And they want to feel like whatever they're doing matters.
Yep.
And unless you can make that use case for them, you will never get the best productivity out of them.
Yeah.
And so what I have found has been being able to have people who lead through empathy and connection has those managers that we've hired that have that capacity and that capability, we get the most productivity out of.
Yeah.
That's going to be critical for an organization going forward.
Yes.
Especially as people are now working remotely. I mean, yeah, you can send an email, but at the end of the day, how do I know you got the email? Yeah, I'll get a reply back, but we all, what do we do with email? We scan
it,
and then we move on. And so part of the thing is, how do we really create a connection so that we are engaging people to operate under optimal conditions and produce their best.
Yes.
And so for me, I think as we start to look at not only the HR component for support around our line workers, but also as we start to look at our middle managers and senior leaders, how we're going to have to reorient the skill sets around motivating and leadership in a remote environment.
Yeah. So, I mean, Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me as we begin to sort of wrap things up. What you see, what are some of your predictions? What are some, if you were to give some insight and advice based on, what you're seeing, because I know you touch so many very large circles, especially in the healthcare, but in the business world. And I know how deeply connected you are. I'm just curious, and I know you read everything. So I'm curious. Let's look into Miguel McInnes's crystal ball and tell us what we should be prepared for. What should we be doing as CEOs and executive and senior leaders and middle managers, even employees, whoever you want to speak to in this space about being intentional in the future?
I think empathic leadership with empathy.
Okay.
Leadership around mobilization around a business problem or business cause.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to motivate teams in hybrid environments is going to be important.
Yeah.
Those are going to be the skill sets, in my opinion, for successful executives and subsequently successful organizations.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be important that we're not only focusing on bottom line dollars making sense, but also at the same time looking at what does that mean in terms of this new environment, in terms of our employees. Because the reality is, if you want to get the best out of people, you got to put your employees first.
Yes.
And you think about Virgin Airlines,
Yeah.
their CEO. That's his motto.
Yeah.
He puts his employees first, and I think there's something to that in terms of organizations that understand um, how to motivate their teams to get the best out of them. Also, I think it's going to be important for organizations that it's important for them to make sure that they're constantly monitoring their consumer expectations, and in some cases, having to reset those consumer expectations, especially as the market changes.
Yeah.
Because one of the challenges that I've found over the course of my career is a lot of times organizations will say, well, we understand our customer and this is what they want, but they've never talked to the customer the last 10
Right.
years.
Right.
And they have this customer in their head that since died.
Exactly.
And so what has happened, I've found those organizations are shortly about to die themselves.
Yes. And talk to the real customer, not the employee representative of the customer.
Exactly.
You got one Black person in the organization, one Hispanic, Latino, you got one Asian, you got an LGBTQ,
right.
And they represent the voice of the rest of the
yeah. I think making sure that you understand your true customer.
Yeah.
And be frank about what you can offer that customer. Because I think sometimes we want to be all things to all people.
Right.
But this market environment, you can't, because they consumers have so many options.
Yes.
And especially in what we're seeing in healthcare, consumers have options.
Yes.
And so part of what our strategy has been and will be is being the provider of choice.
Yep.
And the reason why and how we're looking towards doing that is partnering with our patients so that we're not only their provider, but we're the coach.
Mm-hmm.
And like in any partnership relationship, we're doing what is best that's mutually beneficial for the both of us.
Yes.
Because it has to be a win-win.
Yes.
And so at the end of the day, I think understanding your consumer, your target market is important. Being adaptable to change, understanding what that means to your employees.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, in the case of our organization, making sure that our board is, or your governing body,
Mm-hmm.
sees the changes that are taking place.
Yes.
And understands the changes and embraces the changes, because that's the thing we didn't talk about. Maybe we can do that on another.
We'll do that on another one, because I know you got some thoughts about that. Because I think what's important in the way that you have kind of wrapped this up is just remembering that things have changed. The global landscape, the world of business and employee engagement has totally changed. The needs of the customer have changed. And so the information that we currently have, those data inputs are outdated.
Exactly.
And you cannot look at one person in your employee or that old information about your customers or about employee satisfaction and use that information to determine what you're going to do tomorrow, because it has changed. So we need current and relevant information.
Yeah, I think the other thing too that we didn't talk about is finding out, a lot of times we need to start looking at lead and lag indicators.
Yes.
As ways of understanding and putting a profile together of our customers.
Yep.
Because what has happened, a lot of times we get a lot of data, but it's really the answer is in when you go below the surface.
Dig deep.
You have to dig deep, get into that metadata to understand exactly truly what the customer wants.
Yes.
So I think, and that's all part of being adaptable to change. Those organizations, in my opinion, that I've seen that are successful have mastered that.
Yes.
They are constantly reinventing themselves. They're constantly tearing things apart, putting things together, trying to figure out what works, because they realize what worked today is not going to work tomorrow.
That's right. And if you did a survey or an assessment 6 months ago, throw it in trash, start over.
Exactly.
And like you said, get to the metadata. You got that information, that primary data, initial information that you're gathering, but you got to dig beneath the surface and find out what's behind the number, what's behind the rating, what's behind the evaluation. So you know how to meet the needs of your customer base, your employee base, and your future customers' needs are out there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Miguel, I could talk to you all day and night long. I so appreciate your time. I cannot wait to have you back, because we need to talk about board governance and your expertise and experience in that. And I know that you're doing some great things at Metro Health DC for folks who want to look you up and get involved and to support the work that you're doing. If you're looking for a healthcare provider, they are certainly a place that you should check out. I would wholeheartedly encourage you to do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks again. Help me welcome and thanks again to Miguel McInnes, who is the CEO of Metro Health DC and a leading thought leader out there in the marketplace. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation, and I have grown as a result of it, so I look forward to continuing it in the future.
Oh, I did something to help you? Woo! Yes, you keep talking about the webcast. What? I helped? Oh, I'll take it. No. All right, dear. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks again.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.